A really common question that comes up when people watch my videos is, how do I plant my pond plants? Are they in soil, straight into the pebble, or in pots? Another one is, do I irrigate the plants around my ponds? In this video I'll answer all those questions, plus give you some tips on how you can get plenty of free pond plants. If you don't already know me, my name is Kev, and the aim of my channel is to help people build and maintain a pond without spending a fortune. If that sounds like something that interests you, you might like to subscribe, and be sure to visit my website ozponds.com for useful resources and pond products. So first up, the vast majority of my pond plants are planted directly into the pebble. When I build my ponds, I use an EPDM rubber liner, and I place rock and pebble on the liner to hide it. The rock and pebble not only hides the liner, but it provides the perfect environment for beneficial bacteria and organisms to thrive. The bacteria and organisms are essential to a low-maintenance pond. If you're interested in building or maintaining a pond like this, I have a blueprint or system that I follow, and you can too. There'll be a link in the description. But as I dig out the pond, I create various shelves of different depths and widths. This allows the large rocks to be easily stacked, and then we can backfill with pebble. The flat surfaces can also have pebble on them. Again, this helps hide the liner. The various depths of the shelves and the pebble substrate give us plenty of opportunities to add plants. And if you have an existing pond without shelves, you can easily add them in. So my favourite types of pond plants are the marginals. These are the plants that we add to the shallow edges around the pond. There's a few reasons why these are my favourites. One, they soften the edges of the pond so it doesn't look like just a bunch of rock. Number two, these plants like to have their roots inside the water, but their tops or foliage outside of the water. And this means that we can plant them directly into the pebble, and they'll soak up excess nutrients from the pond water itself. They don't need to be fertilised or have any soil to thrive. Because they're on the margins, it's easy to trim them and thin them out without getting wet. When a plant uses the nutrient inside the water to grow, it pulls that nutrient out of the pond, and that makes it much harder for ugly algae to grow. The third reason I love marginal plants is that there's such a diversity. We have trailing plants like this bacopa, small bushy plants like this milfoil, strappy grassy plants like sweet flag, tall reeds and rushes like this tassel cord rush, and we can even find plants that produce an abundance of colour like these impatiens. So all these plants are planted into the pebble on the margins of the pond, and we can use them in our streams also. I like to mix and match the different types and sizes of plants to create an interesting natural look. I don't want everything to be uniform and boring. If there's a certain angle that I like to view the pond from, I like to use trailing plants so that they don't obstruct the view but still soften the edges. On the opposite side of the pond from this viewing area, I like to have my taller plants that provide a backdrop. Near big rocks, around waterfalls, or bends in a stream, I find the smaller bushy marginals or smaller strappy grass-like plants perfect. When you buy these plants, they're often going to come in pots with soil. I like to remove all the soil. This is going to force the plant to take up the nutrient from the pond. Then it's as simple as digging a little depression in the pebble and anchoring the plants in there. No need to water it. Over time, some of the trailing plants will migrate out of the liner and into the earth surrounding the pond. And this is okay and won't cause too many issues as long as the edges of the liner are nice and high. Some of you may be worried about wicking. This is when something forms a bridge of sorts that allows the water to escape the liner. And look, whenever you add plants to a pond, it's going to cause some additional water loss. But in my experience, if you've built the pond right, and hopefully you have because you've used my blueprint, wink wink, then those losses are most likely going to be from evaporation and the plants actually using the water to grow, same as they would in the ground. So when I see the trailing plants spilling out of the liner, that doesn't concern me at all. But I do pay close attention to the clumping plants like the rushes and the grasses. If these try and escape the liner, they have quite strong root systems, and that has the potential to pull the liner down. And a low edge is the most common source of a pond leak. If you use good quality liner and you've taken precautions with a good strong underlayment, a natural hole is incredibly rare, even in a well-planted pond. It's always the low edge you've got to watch for. And that goes the same for the plants that you use outside the liner. Plants will seek out water, and if a large tree can get even a little root into the pond, over time that'll become a big root, and again, potentially pull down the liner. From time to time, I will check the edges to make sure it's still nice and high, and if I see something I don't like, it's much easier to remove a small plant or root than leave it unchecked. The next group of plants that I'll plant into the pebble is the submerged plants. Sometimes they appear all on their own, well, with the help of some naughty ducks in my case. I'm pretty sure they're responsible for the pondweed in my dream pond. But then certain plants like this eelgrass I intentionally planted into the pebble substrate of the pond. I have a cormorant that likes to visit me every year at about this time, and the punk actually gets into the pond and actively hunts the fish. I'm hoping the eelgrass will give them a bit of added cover this year. Here's another pond that I have native fish, and the herons like to sit on the sides and try and pick them off. So here I have planted this water fringe and water hawthorn directly into the substrate. The foliage on both of these plants floats on the surface, but they have roots in the substrate consuming nutrients and providing the substrate with oxygen, which is good for the organisms and bacteria living down in there. The long trailing stems also provide a maze of cover for the fish to hide in. In my dream pond, I constantly try and pull out the pondweed the ducks deposited. In this pond I like to have open water because I like to have a little dip. There is a big patch of water fringe to provide some additional plant cover for the small native pygmy perch that call the pond home. So the submerged plants planted into the pebble can be useful, but I don't think they're as critical from a filtration point of view. Sure, they can help with oxygenating the water, but if we design the pond right, that's not an issue anyway. And of course we design the filters right because we use the AusPonds formula blueprint. But the other issue that I have with submerged plants is that they still grow like mad, and when their foliage dies off, it decomposes inside the pond. So they don't give you that big nutrient removal benefit like the marginals do. Well, I guess they can if you actually thin them out and remove some of the plants from the pond before they decompose. And that's actually fun when the weather is warm, and I'm pretty lazy, and I only thin mine out. Well, I can't remember the last time I did it. Maybe I'll do it once the herons and cormorants leave for the season. Another potentially useful type of plant is a floating plant like duckweed. These are plants that float on the surface with their roots dangling into the water column. You don't need to plant them, you just throw them in. These types of plants are excellent at consuming nutrient, and they're often very fast growing. The problem is that sometimes if you introduce them, you're never going to get rid of them. A good workaround is, if you live in a cooler climate, to use plants from warmer areas. That way they become an annual, and you replace them each year without the worry of them overtaking your pond. Some fish like eating smaller floaters like duckweed. I know goldfish love it. But I tend to only add floating plants to my smaller filterless ponds, and that way it's easy to scoop out any excess. Sometimes I do wish I never added the duckweed to this pond, and other times I find it quite pretty. I think it looks nice when it doesn't cover the entire surface of the water. Next we have the plants in pots, and I should mention that if you have a pond without shelves or rock and pebble, you can add plants in pots filled with pebble, and you can create artificial shelves and reap the benefits of the plants on the overall ecosystem that it helps create. But in my natural looking ponds, there's one plant that I have in pots, and that's the water lilies. That's because water lilies are heavy feeders and they want lots of nutrients. So the pot's filled with a heavy sort of soil. I've also tried kitty litter, and that works okay. The lily is planted into the soil or kitty litter and then covered with sand or fine gravel. The idea here is that we want to provide the lily with plenty of nutrients, but we don't want the nutrient inside the soil escaping into the water column where it can potentially fuel algae growth. Water lilies also rip through nutrients pretty quickly, and I find if you want lots of blooms and foliage, you really need to feed them twice through the season. If I'm not too lazy, I'll feed them just before the foliage starts to regrow in early spring, and then again in early to mid-summer. To do that, you use an aquatic plant fertilizer tab, push down into the soil inside the pot. Lotus plants are the same, they're heavy feeders. I just inherited a lotus, so I hope to add it to one of my container ponds later in the year. In my climate, I can only grow hardy water lilies and lotus that die back. If you were in a tropical climate, you'd probably need to fertilise 3 or 4 times a year. With water lilies, they like to be in at least 30 centimetres, which is about a foot of water, although I've grown them in less. Lotus are marginal and they want their roots submerged, but the foliage grows up out of the water. Okay, so all these plants so far can be grown inside the pond and there's no need to water them. But the plants outside the pond, well, they need to be watered. I'm not sure why I get this question so much. I just assume it's from people in drier climates, but I get asked how I irrigate the gardens around my ponds. I live in an area of Australia that gets a good amount of rain, especially during the colder months. And the only time that I really water my plants that are in the ground is when I first plant them. Once they're established, they're on their own. So I pretty much just look after them for their first summer, then the rains come, and by the following summer, they should be okay. There are plants like the maples and the ferns that certainly look a bit worse for wear by the end of summer, and certainly could benefit from more effort on my part or an automated watering system. But I think my gardens look okay for the most part, and I'm not trying to win any awards, they're just here for my own enjoyment. Now before I wrap this video up, I just want to leave you with a couple of tips for cheaper, even free pond plants. If you've ever purchased pond plants, you've probably noticed how expensive they are. Well, at least where I live, they can be double the price of a terrestrial plant. The crazy thing is that they grow so damn fast. I've given away so many plants over the years, because otherwise I'd just throw them out. Remember, from time to time we need to thin out the plants to effectively remove the nutrients from the pond, and every pond owner with plants in their pond is doing the same. So you can join pond groups on social media and you'll see people sharing plants often or for free, or sometimes just really cheap with something like bring your own bucket. Keep in mind, sometimes you might get unexpected hitchhikers like fish eggs and snails, but the same is true of store-bought plants anyway. If you're worried, you can always quarantine. Also find that you can propagate all pond plants really easy yourself, so when you're buying them, you only need one of each species. All of the stem plants can be propagated by cuttings, and because they grow in water, you simply remove some stems and plant them in a new area inside the pond. Then you have plants that send out runners like the eelgrass and the water fringe that I showed before, and you simply just break off a runner with some roots and replant it, and bam, new plants. The trailing plants like Bacopa will put down roots as they spread. Again, just pull out a clump with some root and give it away or plant it somewhere else. Then you've got plants with rhizomes like the lotus and the water lily, and they're going to fill up the pot over time, so it is ideal if you split them apart and repot them every couple of years. And yep, when you split them, more plants. If you don't want them, pay it forward, give them to someone else who does. So I hope this video was helpful. If you enjoyed it, you might like to watch this video next. See ya.